Hello and welcome to another episode of Geared Toward Gear. My name's Sean and I'm so glad you're here. I got a quick one today. At least I hope it'll be quick. It may not actually. We'll see how this goes. But just a quick project. I'm going to do a scale swap on my Benchmade Bugout. This is the 535 GRY-1. I just recently got this, but there were some aftermarket scales that I saw in G10 that I thought would look good with the gold hardware as well as the gray coated blade. And that is some red G10 scales. These are from Allen Putman, and I got these on Blade HQ. So let's get these on there, see how they look. I realize this may not be the most exciting video ever, just me kind of doing a disassembly and putting some scales on. So if you want to fast forward to the end and see the final product, you're not going to hurt my feelings. But if you want to stick around and kind of see how this works and what the bug out looks like once it's broken down, please feel free to stick around. I got my knife maintenance kit out, and this is another reason why I like keeping two drivers in my kit. As I mentioned in that video, is that the bug out uses T6 on all the body screws and then a T8 on the pivot. And so I've got one set up with a T6 and one with a T8, so I don't have to swap back and forth. Hopefully this goes smoothly. If it doesn't, I have a feeling the thing that will kind of be a hang up will be getting the pivot back in. That always seems to be challenging on some knives. I've done scale swaps that have taken 2 minutes and others that have taken 20 minutes, so let's quit talking and get down to business. I've also never done this around a tripod, so we'll see how that goes. So I'm just going to take off one side, just all the body screws. Again, these are T6 torque screws, so we're going to get all these out and kind of do one side at a time. At least I think that's kind of my plan, is to do one side at a time and see if that works. I don't want to break it all the way down to just the blade and the kind of axis lock mechanism, but we will get a good look at the axis lock and the kind of system, the spring system. I want to say, and Zach, if you're watching, you can correct me if I'm wrong, alpha spring, omega spring, something like that, whatever they call the spring in the bug out, or in the axis lock in general. Let's go ahead and take out the pivot screw here with a T8 Torx. And we should be good on this side, so that should just lift right off. Our barrel spacers stayed in place, so there's our axis lock. And the spring there, I think it's called the omega spring, I could be wrong. But there's our locking mechanism. So let's take the right scale here, kind of line it up with the barrel spacers. Ooh, I think that's going to look nice. I think it's going to look real nice. So let's get a couple of these screws back in here just to kind of hold things in place. If I can get them in the right orientation. That's the one problem with having really big hands is, man, handling some of this tiny hardware can be a challenge. But we will persevere. And that's a T8, so that's not going to work. There is a T6. All right, so we'll get a couple of these in here. And I'm not going to over tighten these, just kind of barely hand tight. I'll go back once I'm completely done and get everything kind of to my liking. Adjust the pivot if I need to, maybe add a drop of lube if necessary. But this is a pretty smooth knife already, so I'm going to do the mill screw and leave the top corner here where the kind of the stop pin is. I'm going to leave that one out just for now. And then I'll pop the pivot out. And that's where things always get a little, potentially at least, can get a little challenging. So it's already looking quite handsome, I think, with that kind of dark crimson red color. I'm digging that quite a bit, guys. You guys tell me what you think. But I think it looks awesome. So with the pivot, if I use the T8s, the bigger one should just pop out. So I'm going to pull that out. And I usually like to use something other than the bit itself, but that may be the only option here. I'm just going to put that there and kind of rest it. So hopefully that keeps things aligned, because now all I have to do is take out the rest of the T6 hardware throughout the knife on this side, and we should be in business. So hopefully this goes well and doesn't take too long. I want to try to See, the problem is there's bronze washers in here. So where I just took out that pivot, where I have this bit kind of just sitting right now, those washers, they should be lubed from the factory, and I'm certain that they are because it's a very smooth operating knife. They can kind of move around, right? So the alignment of the pivot, the blade, and the washer on each side is critical, you know, that you keep those aligned. And so, you know, if you've ever done any kind of like machining work or woodworking, kind of using like an alignment pin is kind of the concept here. So that should be everything on that side. So this should lift off. And those barrel spacers should stay in place because they're screwed in from the other side. So there's the internals again. Now we will take the left side scale, or I guess right side technically. Align that. Barrel spacers are good. So I'm going to drop a screw in each of the barrel spacers. Get those just kind of hand tight. And anytime you're doing a scale swap like this, especially with a material like G10 or any kind of plastic, you just got to be really careful when you're tightening these to not over tighten. And that's one of the reasons I like a manual driver. And I mentioned that in my video that I did on my kit. I don't like the ratcheting. I get a little overconfident sometimes, and the last thing I want to do is crack these scales. G10's very strong, and I have no concerns that I would crack them, but nonetheless, I just want to be extra careful to not do anything too crazy and over tighten any of the hardware here. So I just dropped a screw, but I see where it is, so we're good to go there. And I probably should have a magnetic bowl. I mentioned that, I think, in my knife maintenance kit video as well. In projects like this, I typically will keep a kind of a magnetic parts bowl for this reason, so that they all stay in place. But I didn't get one out of the garage, and that's on me, and so hopefully we don't lose any hardware. Okay, so let me grab the one I dropped. Drop that one right there in the middle. What do you think, guys? You think this looks better than the standard? And I know I mentioned in my very, very first bug out video that I probably would not replace the scales just because of the cost. When you add the cost of the scale to the cost of the knife, you know, you end up with a knife that's quite a bit more expensive than just the base model. But after carrying the blue one as much as I have, I've just really come to love carrying this knife, and decided for myself anyway that it was worth the extra cost to add some custom scales, or aftermarket scales rather. And I'm happy that I did. They look quite nice. I actually have another set on the way for my blue bug out, so those will be getting some new scales as well. So I've got one screw left. It's going to go on the top side here, and then we're going to address the pivot, see if that goes in without any issues, and if we get lucky, we'll have kind of done this on the first try. These WeHa bits that I mentioned in my previous video are magnetic, which is really helpful, but sometimes they will grab kind of the wrong side of the hardware, like it's wanting to do now, and make it a little challenging, but with a little practice and effort, it's usually not a huge issue. I'm not paying too much attention to the viewfinder, I apologize, so hopefully this is in focus and you're able to see what I'm doing. So the scales are on, all of the hardware is in place. All we have left is the pocket clip and the pivot. So hopefully the pivot goes back in, and it should go in from this side. And there's a flat piece, if you notice here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's actually a flat right there. So that should face to the left. And this may take a while. And if this doesn't go in easily, I may just pause the video and come back once I get it in. Because getting it through those washers and through the scales can be challenging sometimes. So it looks like one of the washers, as you can see, has kind of floated up a little bit. So I'll just take the T6 bit here and just slide that down a hair and push from the other side. Sometimes if you wiggle the blade a little bit, it actually helps, but it does not seem to be helping in this case. And I have now misaligned the washers by opening the blade the way I just did. So as you can see, one of the washers is now sitting up way higher than it should be. So what I can possibly do is use the pocket clip or just something very thin. I may grab a toothpick here in a second and try to get that washer back down where it needs to go. If I tap, if I can get that washer back down far enough, I can actually just use the drive bit to kind of reseat it. So as you can see, it's getting closer. I can almost see the hole there. So I can, okay, so now I can see the hole in the washer. I can use my bit to slide that, as you can see, to give me that clearance again. So I am now relatively aligned, but again, these tolerances sometimes are, sorry for the camera bump, can be pretty tight, and so getting everything to go through may just take some time. So I'm gonna mess with this for a little bit, pause the video very briefly, and I'll come back when this is all put together and finished. So stand by, and we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and we are almost done. And I will tell you that getting that pivot back in real time took about 20 minutes. The tolerances on these scales are ridiculous, and so that was actually quite challenging. But I think it turned out really nice. What do you guys think? The color, the red on the gray blade with the gold accents, I think it looks great. Centering's perfect. I did add 1 drop of real oil to the pivot and 1 drop to the axis lock mechanism. So this thing is just crazy, crazy smooth. Just drops shut. When it's in a closed position, if I had to press the axis lock, and I'm kind of holding it at an angle, but it just falls out. Having said that, I did kind of dial in the pivot where I want it, so I'm going to back it out, add a drop of Loctite. But before I do that, let's put the pocket clip back on. And we're going to be almost done with our little project here. And I'm pretty happy with it. The quality on these scales and the fit is actually quite good. I've heard, you know, varying reports from different companies. I'm not going to name any names, but I've just heard varying reports on different aftermarket scales and whether or not they fit properly. And these seem to fit quite nicely. They seem very strong. They feel good in the hand. They just feel nicer, more substantial and sturdier than the factory scales here. And I think it looks sexy as well. So let's back this pivot screw out a little bit, actually all the way. And we're gonna add a drop of Loctite, and I'll kind of show you what that process looks like here. Got to make sure to keep the pivot kind of cylinder in there, because that was not easy to get in. So let's get our Loctite out of our little maintenance kit here. And I'm just going to add a single drop to the threads on the pivot screw here. So just, if I can get a focus there, just a single drop, just like so. And I'm going to, yeah, it's going to kind of spread around as I thread it. So I'm going to drop it carefully into the hole there so I don't get Loctite everywhere. And now I can take my T8. Is that it? Yep. And I can reinstall the pivot screw and put a little pressure on the pivot from the back side just to make sure it doesn't back out on me. And tighten that down like so. And I'm going to start a little loose just to make sure I still have it where I want it. That's not quite, needs to go in just a little further. maybe half a turn. Oh, let's back it out of here. Maybe an eighth of a turn. Centering is pretty much perfect. Maybe a hair off to the right, but I'm not complaining about that. It wasn't any better prior to these scales. So let me go see if I go a touch further, if that'll center it a little better. Okay, centering's a little better, but that's a little tighter than I want it. So I'm going to back it out back again. Eighth of a turn. Drop my tool. And that is the action that I am looking for. And so as that thread locker dries, it's going to maintain that position of the pivot screw. And if I want to back it out in the future, I can with no problems. The blue Loctite is not permanent, but it does hold well, and it holds for a long time. So that screw is not going to back out unless I put a Torx bit to it. So that'll ensure that this kind of smoothness and action that I want remains in place. So that's it. That is the final product. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like the color, it's a little bit translucent. You can almost see the axis mechanism through there, which I think is kind of cool. And I just think the red on the gold with the gray blade, I think just looks nice. So that is project complete. Let's get all this junk out of the way. Get the dirty stuff out of the way and give you kind of the glory shot there. So that's it. That is the finished product. Thank you guys for watching. If you did stick around for the whole thing, I appreciate your patience. Plenty more videos coming up in the future, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.